Welcome to another edition of Yorkton Stories, our look at Yorkton and area people and events, past and present. My name is Dick DeReich. We appreciate the support of our premier sponsors, Harvest Meats and Grain Millers, both here in Yorkton, and others who assist us in many ways, including Beelang Media. Our podcasts are available on our website, yorktonstories.ca, where you will also find photos, links, and other information associated with each podcast when available. So you can not only hear the story, you can also see and read information about the podcast topic. We can also be found in all major podcast directories. Search for Yorkton Stories, and you will find us. The village of Hamton, spelled without the usual P in that common name, is like many Saskatchewan communities between Yorkton and Canora, still on the map, but not really there anymore. Nestled between Highway 9 North and the rail line from Yorkton to Canora, Ebenezer and Gorlitz have survived. They are not what they once were, but they are still there. But trying to find anything resembling Meehan, just north of the Yorkton Airport and east of the highway, or Burgess north of the White Sand River, where the highway takes a bend, is futile, long gone. That Yorkton to Canora rail line, by the way, was built by Doukhobor work crews in the early 1900s for the Grand Trunk and Pacific Railroad, and is now operated by Canadian National. It is a story in itself. Look a little further to the east, and the maps, rural included, still show Hamton and Donwell. You might also see Mazeppa and Nieper. All of them had businesses and post offices and family homes, perhaps schools, and certainly grain elevators if they were on a rail line, as Hamton was, on a busy line that came up from Manitoba through McNutt, Calder, Roxton, Stornoway, Ryan, and Hamton, and turned straight west just north of Hamton to join the Grand Trunk CN line to Canora. On Google Maps, the line shows up in portions, although it is long gone. On the ground, it may still show up as a right-of-way in places, although the rails were removed in the early 2000s. There are other landmarks of life and death from the early 1900s in the area. The Krepakavich family cemetery, a mile east of Hamton. The Holy Trinity Cemetery, also known as Palabrotus Church Cemetery, just north of there. The Ukrainian Pioneer Cemetery, a few miles northeast of Gorlitz. To say that there's nothing left of Hamton, though, is a misstatement. It looks that way from the intersection of the grid roads to the west and south, since the triangle that was the village between those two roads and the old rail line is overgrown with tall weeds, shrubbery, and a few trees. But seen from above, as you can on Google Maps and Google Earth, from satellite imagery from 2023, the remnants of buildings are still visible. Zoom in and Google Maps will tell you that there were 4 streets: Railway Avenue, Main Street, First Street, and First Avenue. Until 2018, those buildings were standing, but abandoned and unused, except for the old community hall, in which some young people had built skateboard ramps. Many of the lots, however, were still privately owned, and some were used to grow vegetables. And the owners of the lots paid taxes to the rural municipality of Sliding Hills, as little as 73 cents a year, until the provincial government allowed a minimum property tax to be set by bylaw, which Sliding Hills set as $30, causing many of the owners to give up their title. Then one weekend in early May of 2018, whatever was left of the village of Hamton burned to the ground. Abandoned cars, an abandoned school bus, all the buildings still standing, the grass just emerging from the ground, all gone. Was it caused by Mother Nature? Was it a grass fire? Or a controlled fire set by someone that got out of control? Obviously, somebody knows, but the cause of that fire that took down what was left of Hamton, Saskatchewan, remains a mystery. Ed Kiowski, who farms just west of the village, saw the smoke, as he recalls in our conversation. It was a Sunday morning as he, his wife, and family from Saskatchewan were getting in their vehicles to go to Yorkton for a Ukrainian dance festival. He had been the rural municipality councillor for the RM of Sliding Hills from 1992 to 2008, had retired, and wasn't on council at the time of the fire. He was elected again as the Division 3 councillor in 2022. And who set the fire was one of the first questions he asked when he was back on council. Randy Hudima lived in Hamton as a youngster and provided us with photos he took of what was left of the village in 2011, which are on our website at yorktonstories.ca. While the main fire was the first weekend of May 2018, Randy remains convinced that there were more fires on at least one other weekend, maybe two, that month. Chris Attrell is a photographer in Shaunavon, Saskatchewan, who specializes in photographing old landmarks and abandoned buildings across the prairies. He had been in Hamton in 2006 to make photos of the buildings that were still standing at the time. He came back in July of 2018 to make a video of the burn shot from a drone, interspersed with some of the still photos taken 12 years previously, a short but poignant look at before and after. The video can still be seen on his Facebook page called Forgotten Saskatchewan, and with Chris's permission, can also be viewed along with his photos from 2006 on our website. Hamton was established in 1910, named after either Charlie Hammond, who made hay near the town site, according to Bill Berry's authoritative Dictionary of Saskatchewan Place Names, or after Thomas Hammond, who homesteaded on the section and donated the town site. That, according to a history of the village prepared by Hamton school students, Berry points out. In 1911, the Ross Junction rail line from Canora through Hamton to Roxton was completed, which resulted in a post office being opened in Hamton. It was run throughout its 59 years of existence out of the village's general store, for the last 10 years by John and Josie Gorczynski, until it was closed in 1970. Over those years, the mail was delivered from Canora to the post office by first ox cart, then horse and wagon, rail, and in the last half-decade, by truck. Ed Kiowski farms a mile west of Hamton. We talked to him about Hamton history, about the Pelly Trail and the Doukhobor halfway house, which was on what is now his land, and about the fire. You came to spend time around Hamton back in the mid-60s.
Yes.
You were from Canora. What brought you to Hamton when you were a teenager?
A nice, beautiful girl. We 52 years of good marriage, raised 2 good kids. Now we got 4 good grandchildren. I love the area, and I still love putting Hamton on the map. I did a line locate the other day, and the guy asked me, whereabouts are you? I says, Hamton. But I says, Hamton might not be on the map anymore. And the guy looks back and says, oh yeah, it's on the map. Good. Whenever I put down where I'm from is Hamton, because I like being it on the map.
What was in Hamton when you first started coming here?
Well, there was 4 elevators. There was 4 elevator houses for agents living in Hamton. I know 2 families that were still living there, right? There was the store, post office was still there, and the garage, the hall, church was in there yet. That's about it. The old store was ran by Joe Petroskowicz. The RM already had taken the pool room over and made it into a patrol for the greater park in there. But at that time, Joe Petroskowicz had the general store there. He sold gas pumps. And between the pool room and the store, he had a roof built in there, and that was sort of his warehouse, or that's where he had his ice box in there. 77. I took the store apart for the log building, which I used as firewood in my old shop and to heat my house at the time.
Was there a school there at the time?
School was moved to Canora. There was no school here.
Yeah.
School grounds is still there. It hasn't been touched. But the school was moved to Canora because they call it the cottage school. And there's about 3 that moved in Canora, and they used to use them for music room and stuff like that, special classes. And now those are disappeared out of there too.
When I look at old maps of Hamton, there seems to be kind of 2 streets. They run on an angle along the railway.
The one ran along the elevator on the north side of the track. That was the elevator road. And then the other one ran at an angle, Main Street in Hamton. There was a house of ill repute across the railroad track. And I got lumber out of that. The bar I built out of the Doukhobor halfway house that was here. When I took the barn apart, it was all built with tamarack logs, like power poles. It was a shame to cut them up. And when I took that barn apart, inside they had an area for their chickens. They had an area for their pigs. It was a huge barn. And there was an area in there, I don't know what it was for, but there was a lot of interesting writing on those walls. And some of that lumber I did save with some of the names on there, which I will never mention. But it was quite interesting reading the walls. And I took apart that store. I wasn't interested in any antiques or anything at that time, but I sold the glass displays to a fellow to salt coats and stuff like that for $20. What an idiot. And he had a homemade cash register, like a drawer. So when I removed it, I shook it like this. And I think it was 16 silver dimes fell out. The town started to decline when the schools shut down because the post office was pretty new. The school started it because as soon as people quit coming into the school, it was on a decline before the elevator shut down. Because the elevator shut down in 1985.
As in many rural villages back in the mid to late 1900s, the Hamton Community Hall was a hub of activity. But it died a slow death for reasons Ed talks about. It took money to operate the hall, but it became increasingly difficult to raise money from an aging population, and young people who had left the village weren't coming back. It became harder and harder to raise money through raffles without big prizes to attract buyers, Ed recalls.
When I became the fire chief of the Arm of Sliding Hills in 1985, we had a raffle of 15 different things once every month. And the money we made for our fire equipment was unreal. You know, it was something because people were interested in buying stuff like that.
Was the hall active?
We had weddings, anniversaries, parties, stag parties, stuff like that there. We redid that hall inside. Bingos, just all kinds of different things, fall supper. And that went on till probably, the fall suppers went on damn near to 1990. So it was good, but then again, you're losing the women that were cooking, doing all this stuff.
It was all volunteers, right?
Well, definitely, yeah. There was nobody's getting paid for none of that. It was just to get together and party time, you know. Like, and it was good. It was nice. Put in running water at that time. We had to haul water naturally, but we had indoor toilets. That was really good. That brought in a lot of people. People still get together, and there's not many left around to talk about it.
I remember one of the fall suppers that was big around here was Mazeppa Hall.
Yeah.
Well, I have never seen so much home-baked pie in one place than at that fall supper.
And the cabbage rolls and the pierogies and the say roast ham. Oh. Yeah, that's all gone, right? Yeah. That's all gone.
In the very early 1900s, there was a well-used trail, the Pelly Trail, from Fort Pelly and from the Key Indian Reservation, as it was then called, and from the Doukhobor settlements around Verrigan down to Yorkton. It was used extensively by those going to the larger town to the south to buy goods and supplies. But that trek was a day-long journey each way, and the horses needed to rest partway through. The Doukhobor community bought a farm just west of Hamton and established a communal settlement called Vertsivo. From 1907 to 1918, it was the stopping point for Doukhobor wagon teams traveling the Pelly Trail. It consisted of a house, a store, barn, and brick-lined wells to draw water for the horses and travelers. The halfway house was on land eventually owned by Ed Kiowski. The only map of the trail we have found was hand-drawn and likely not to scale and of obvious questionable accuracy as to the location of towns and villages. It shows the trail east of Hamton, but Ed says the trail was still visible when he started farming, and it ran right through the middle of what is now his farmyard at home, right through the large shop where he and I talked, a mile west of Hamton. He convinced the RM Council to make road signs designating the historic Pelly Trail, which can be seen on the grid roads in the area, although little, if anything, is left to be seen of the trail itself. The research I did, and this is from Doukhobor history sites, said that the halfway house had a couple of wells, brick-lined wells dug by the Doukhobors. Are they still there?
We farmed around them. There's the ice house, just 2 wells. We farmed around them in that area in the drier years, and then when the water came high again, it was all underwater. Back in '95, we were going to the lake, and I stepped in at the Long Hotel to pick up some beer for the lake, and there was about 6, 7 Doukhobors from Verrigan campsite sitting there having a beer. And one guy called me over and asked me, he says, own that land there? And I says, yeah. And he says, the building's still there. And I says, well, the house, the store is still there. I took apart the barn. He tells me, he says, you don't touch that house. And I says, who are you to tell me what I could do on my land? And he says, well, there was that 17-year-old girl murdered there, and she's buried just south of the house. And he says there was an ice house, and she's buried there, and her grave is surrounded by that. I don't know if you remember back in the day, if you guys had any of that really fancy twisted wire, and you had it around the garden usually. And he says she's buried there. Now, the Oyster family, when they lived in that house, they claimed they would see her in her nightgown with her nightcap, with one of those candle holders, going up that stairwell. That house was it was way different. On the stairwell, when it changed directions, when you're sitting on this one landing, there was a plug in the wall. You take the plug out, and you could see right outside to the south, right between those maple trees now. What that was all about, I don't know. We're talking about this in a bar, and this one Doukhobor there says, like a Doukhobor can't spend the night there. And this beat sides off, he was a Doukhobor. He says, oh, go spend a week there. What are you going to pay me? The guy says, I'll give you $1,000 if you can spend one night. He says, I'll spend a week. He says, Pete, you're going to be dead the first night. He says, why? And he says, that girl is going to kill you. And these guys had such a strong belief in that. And I said, this is all bullshit, right? Shortly after that, when Jonathan got a hold of me, and he wanted to go visit that place. So I told him that story. Then it was about a year later, they brought one of the elders from Canora, Fred Petroff, and a Gorkoff from Campsack, and they came down and they asked if they can go see it. And we went down and took a look at the place. And then when the Doukhobors had this 100 and some year celebration, then you had 6 tour buses go there, and they stopped on the road by the bridge, and they had to walk all the way around, probably 3/4 of a mile, to go around alongside the crop to get to the buildings. I know where they used to have their manure piles from the cows and all that, still till today. Because I could tell guys when I got canola there, I says, how's it coming about? And I says, 112 bushels an acre, only on 10 acres. Because it just grows, everything grows wild in there, because there's years and years of manure that.
Another common tale about the Doukhobors in the area, Ed says, is that the women not only pulled the plows, of which there is ample evidence, but that they also pulled large tree stumps from the land when trees were cut down. Ed questions that, based quite simply on the fact there were no trees in that entire area. It was flat and mainly barren land at the time, some shrubbery, but no trees. He heard it from an old-timer, but it can also be seen on the website prairietowns.com. That's prairie and then hyphen and then towns.com, which has historic photos from various communities in the area. Even an aerial photo of Canora, taken from the water tower in the 1950s, shows few, if any, trees in the town and the surrounding countryside.
Talking with John Oyster, and he says this creek ran 12 months of the year, winter and summer, because of the springs up in Wallace Creek up there. And I said, okay, John, tell me, any trees here? He says, not a damn tree. He says the first thing that started happening is the trees started growing along the creek. But he says what happened is when the guys came here, plowed up the prairie and started farming, and then when the dry years came, they didn't farm it. Then the wet years came, and places were left, and that's when the poplar trees grew. As he said, you know, when you look at some of the photographs of the old photographs, you see there's no goddamn trees around. Like even in Canora, around Canora, when they took off the water tower years back, there are no trees there. And the beavers, there's no beavers here till the 30s, right? And they were brought in because Canora Courier had 100-year newspaper, right? And they had an article from each year in there, right? But during the Depression, when there was no dugouts and stuff like that, that's when the RM started building dugouts for guys. And the Saskatchewan, what I call fish cops now, went to Ontario and they brought the Canadian beaver to Saskatchewan. So I says, they're the ones that should pay for all this damage.
The fires. There was a few buildings left.
There was quite a few buildings. Then it burnt that Sunday morning. And I remember it was a Sunday, I think the beginning of May. I was walking from the shop here. His Ukrainian dance concert competitions were on in Yorkton at the regional. And we were getting ready to go. And my daughter and son-in-law were from Saskatoon. And we met here all on the lawn. We're talking. And I says, and it was windy. And I says, what in the hell is that? We drove up there and she was all toasted. Then it was a week later when John Philipchic's burnt down. And that's so the RM had nothing to do with that. This is what I got back on council. That's one of the first questions I asked. And we would never, like me being on council, we'd never do that because there was still, that garage was there. That was still owned by Gruchinski's. There's a lot of people that still own properties.
So who started the fires?
Nobody knows. I don't know.
It wasn't a natural fire, no, because the trees were okay, but the buildings were gone.
It was a fast fire. I saw the fire. It was a fast fire and it was windy. Even the buildings weren't that close together like some of them, right? Because I could see this block going all at once, but the ones on the other side. So intentional? Most likely. I don't know. Like, what else would it be, right? Like, or somebody started a fire there and it went away on them and everything went, yeah.
Are the streets still there?
Yeah, you could still drive.
You can drive in there?
Yeah.
So it's basically a flat piece of land with some streets and
a bunch of garbage because nobody ever cleaned it up, right?
Yeah.
Whatever burnt there, nobody ever cleaned it up.
Chris Attrell's video of the aftermath of the fire on the Facebook page Forgotten Saskatchewan has been viewed more than 20,000 times and has drawn many comments, including from those who grew up in Hamton. From Brian Oystrick. Sad to see. I remember going to the store with Grandpa and picking up some groceries and getting gas after unloading grain at the elevator. Carolyn Heschke wrote, my hometown. My mom and dad ran a garage, store, and post office. We came home to Yorkton on the night of the 3rd of May. I told my husband that I wanted to go take the door off our house. I wanted to make a headboard for a bed. The very next night, the town burned down. May 4th, 2018. Heartbreaking. I went to school in Hamton until grade 5. Then it closed down, Jen Colleton wrote. I grew up on a farm about 1 mile from Hamton and lived there until I was 18. My mom and dad, Annie and Merlin Morosky, stayed on the farm until 1992 when they moved to Yorkton. It is very sad to see these pictures and learned that the village was burned down. Lots of good people live there, and I have many fond memories of trips to Hamton to get the mail, hauling grain, etc., with my dad, and visit the Gorchinski family pretty much on a daily basis. Gail Lee Christensen posted this. Gosh, that is making me cry. Old buildings are a bit like old people to me, made of good stuff. Nice to see that one green tree still standing, almost as a tribute. Watch for and listen to another podcast next month. Visit yorktonstories.ca to hear this and all previous podcasts, and there you can also sign up to our email list so that we can let you know when a new episode is available. You can also support us with a donation if you wish to help defer the cost of the technology that makes these podcasts possible. Thanks again to Harvest Meats and Grain Millers for their support. Thanks to those who contributed their memories and documents and knowledge to this podcast, Ed Kiowski, Chris Attrell, and Randy Hudima. And thank you for listening. Your comments and suggestions are always welcome. Get in touch through our website or by emailing Dick, D-I-C-K, at yorktonstories.ca. Join us again next month for more Yorkton Stories.